Welcome to the Quantum City Initiative, a show about the most important stories, ideas at the intersection of AI, cities, real estate, and the leaders shaping the future of how and where we live and work. Do you save and reinvigorate cities, or are you building new ones?
What is most critical for cities in the future with the sort of AI factory race to work? All right, here we go. Welcome to the show, episode 13. Big day yesterday. How do you feel, man? We hosted STRATA in partnership with MIT. We've been plugging this thing for weeks now. Quick recap. We got a lot on the docket today. We're going to go one by one. We got some quick hits, but overall, Chase, good day.
It was a great day, and hats off to you and our partners at MIT's Center for Real Estate. Events are tough to pull off, but you guys packed the room. I think probably total it was a 200-person room. We probably had 250 people come through, and speaker lineup was A plus. So that was a
Yeah.
great day.
I think there was something unique maybe about partnering with MIT where it's up to the caliber of the conversation. At least that's what our partners in MIT said. But the dialogue was really good, and as we prepped the panels, everybody's been to conferences where you can see that a theme is forced.
Mm.
That was certainly not the case here. Honestly, my highlight, and before we go into some of the panels, and we'll go one by one, my highlight was the night before at View Boston. So I had never been to View Boston. I'd been to Top of the Hub. That's the top of the Prudential Center. Boston Properties did, I think it was $175 million redevelopment of the top three floors. They got a bar, they got a restaurant. And we hosted a little VIP reception for all the folks that were flying in from the West Coast, Dubai, China, Japan. There were a lot of international folks there. And it was a great reception. The skyline, obviously, is insane. The view up there, let's call it the view for a reason. But more importantly, it was a good sort of cozy environment to hang out and have a good chat. And what was nice was that night and some of the conversations were referenced the next day in the panel. So that was my favorite part.
That venue is exceptional. It's obviously I'm a homer to Boston, but you can see everything in the city. You got great views of Fenway, you got great views of Harvard, MIT, Cambridge. You can see all the way over to the airport on the east side. So no better setting than View Boston to kick things off. And they did a great job with that renovation. So all in all, top class, my friend, top class.
Top class. So we have a ton of content video. We videoed the whole day. We have a ton of photos and all that sort of stuff will be distributed. All the clips. Make sure you follow us on obviously all the social channels, but definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's where we're going to post a handful of the clips and all the talks. But so let's get into it, man. Before we get to the quick hits, and there was a couple of really good stories to talk about this week. And one very interesting, one more bit of news, which is slightly uncomfortable, but we'll get to that in a little bit. However, let's start today. Okay, so we started the day. Steve Weichel at MIT had a wonderful kickoff, which was great. Really, really set the tone. Real big picture about the sort of built environment transition, as our friends at MIT call it. And then you and I did a little do-si-do on really defining the quantum city. Now, if this isn't the first podcast you've seen, you're familiar with what it is. Do you want to just give us 30 seconds on our talk, and then I'll jump in on the retrofit panel, which I moderate, and then we'll go down the lineup.
Yeah, look, we've been trying the impetus for the quantum city is we believe that in order to invigorate economic growth across the West, but really anywhere, you have to have a smarter goal than smart cities. And what we talked about yesterday at the conference is that smart is not a goal, right? Tech is not an outcome. Tech should be one of the inputs that drives an outcome that's good for the overall city. And at the end of the day, cities are where people come together to build things, create things, and really push civilization forward. And when we think about cities, the best metric to measure our success is GDP. And economic growth needs a goal. So what we've set out is when you look at the best cities throughout human history, they've been able to grow at a 10% GDP clip year over year for a 10-year period. And so when we define quantum city, it's that simple goal. And we think the critical inputs to creating a quantum city is human centricity, right? It should be designed for the user of the city. And obviously, it should be tech enabled, but the tech should serve the outcome of the GDP growth. So we talked a little bit about that, and that kind of set the stage, including Steve Weichel's talk about the built environment transition, where Steve is a world class speaker and presenter. And he talked about the mega trends in terms of everything that's happening with technology, advanced manufacturing. He talked a lot about the titanium economy, which I thought was cool, and just the new ways that people are thinking about unlocking a lot of the innovation that obviously a lot of it comes from MIT, but other places, and how we can start to piece these things together in different models, right? We talk a lot about there shouldn't be one kind of single model, but different models should be able to compete. And the panels, I think, did an awesome job of diving deeper into some of the mega trends that we talked about and Steve talked about.
Yeah, so let's get into the first panel. So I moderated this panel, which moderating's fun. It's also a bummer because I don't get to insert my opinions. I don't
Yeah.
get to jump. I need to weave the conversation as opposed to blatantly disagreeing with Dominic Endicott at one point about how VCs are going to save the world, which I tried to. And I think the AV guys actually muted me for a second when I said, yeah, VCs are going to absolutely love to hear that.
I think
But anyways,
MIT has a technology that when the moderator says, and this next question is for myself, the mic goes
let
off.
me, let me take the next one.
All right, Greg, this question is for Greg.
All right, so the panel was Dominic Endicott. He's doing some very interesting things. So he's the author of Knowledge Towns. He's a partner of what is effectively a consulting firm that's helping reimagine cities, but not your major cities, not your known cities. The idea here is that there's so much more, and there's effectively about 1,000 knowledge towns, and they're not the Bostons, the New Yorks, and so on. Then we had Daniel English, he was the co-founder and managing partner of Legacy Investing. What was most interesting about him was he was bringing all of the sort of data center and AI infrastructure talk. So all of his major customers are CoreWeave, and he's working directly in implementing and building out these massive gigawatt data centers. And where he's placing them is really interesting. We teased this a little bit. Where he's focusing is in urban environments. And again, so he's not thinking like we talked about Alaska or underwater in China. He's thinking about taking buildings in urban environments, taking a handful of floors and putting the data centers in there. Kevin Mull, wonderful experience conversation around what happened with Detroit. So if you think about a city retrofit, there's no better example where you watched the Detroit as a whole sort of peak with the automobile industry and then go into massive decline, bankruptcy, and then build its way back. Mm-hmm. Most of the conversation, the questions I had with him were around is Detroit back? Like, how do you define that, right? Yeah. So it was certainly the learnings that they had, and I'll get into that in a second once I finish on this introduction. But how do you measure whether Detroit's done? Is it ever done? And then lastly, Andy Doyle from Grosvenor brought some incredible experience around how they're thinking about London. So anyway, so we started the panel just talking about there's a quote about 30% of the office basically is unusable. It needs to go into what would be a retrofit. Mm-hmm. And one of the main areas that we talked about is that possible? And can that be possible? And how do you go about it? How do you underwrite it? The main takeaway here was you need to certainly think out of the box, but everything is going to take an insane amount of time. Why? It's very difficult to build in the United States. Now, Andy Doyle and Grosvenor, they're actually got a head start. It's one of the few areas where EMEA and London, despite some of their struggles in other areas, they're actually able to move a little bit faster than retrofitting Boston, New York. But the underlying tone of that conversation and that question was around power grid, infrastructure, how do we go about it? And then how do you rethink what buildings are meant for? And that specifically was around, and then I'll let you jump in, that specifically was around every building that we have today is made for an individual, is made for a person. The majority of the money and sort of the free money trade right now is the AI infrastructure bets. We've talked about that a bunch. Those buildings are not made for people. They're made
Right.
for computers. How do you balance that, right? So you have a significant infrastructure upgrade that needs to happen in a city. However, it's very different because now you're talking about making buildings for computers and not people.
Yeah, and look, the computers are only there in the buildings to serve people. So, what I thought was cool was a lot of the panels started to converge on some similar things, even though this one was talking about retrofitting what we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the topics that came up a lot across panels was culture.
Yeah.
And naturally, as human beings, we have nostalgia for what came before and what cities were. And I think there is something important about whether it's the culture of Detroit or some other area. I think it's good that people care about that. They want to keep the culture of Detroit alive. But on some of the other panels, particularly some of the folks from the Middle East that are doing fascinating things in all areas of the world, not just there, they're saying at some point you have to weave culture into what is new because we have to serve people today, and so that requires new infrastructure. So I'm not convinced that the college towns, the knowledge towns, are necessarily going to be able to keep people where they are. I think they're, and it's not because Dominic's thesis is wrong. I think there's a lot of validity in what he's saying. You educate these people here. How do you keep them as members of the community to build a vibrant community and economy? I just think that one of the challenges we have is upstream of that in terms of higher ed actually educating people the way they can be successful. So I would have loved to pull that thread, but it's probably one or two kind of clicks outside of what we were focused on. And I think the other thing that kept coming up, and Travis Kalanick talked about this, but obviously Andy Doyle, I think, was a good living, breathing example of it, is that it's just too hard to build in the United States, right? We're going to fall behind very seriously if we continue to prevent builders from building.
And that was specifically, and then we'll move to the next panel because you had a good little segue, but that was specifically where Daniel English chimed in. I asked him straight up, will Boston, fall behind? It's just as an example, right? We were certainly in Boston. He had a nice take that he certainly can't speak for this city alone, but then he outlined that basically, yes, we will, because it is very difficult to build, and we do not have, which is one of your favorite sayings, the political will and skill. So then I asked the question, a follow up for everybody, real quick, which was, who's responsible for these next for taking Boston to the next generation? Who is it, or New York? Who's responsible for it? Now, this is where I was somewhat shocked. Everybody on the panel said private markets. Okay, so the private sector. And then specifically, Dominic went into the venture capital world because his take was, you got to pour money into VCs. You got to pour money into VCs. You got to let them deploy capital. You're going to create jobs. You're going to create companies. That's how all of a sudden you're going to keep everybody in a specific city. But we didn't get into policymaking. We didn't get into the sort of public side of the house. And that is where I think Boston and some of these Western cities will fall behind. I think the private markets are there. It was nice to see that private markets is one of the things we can control a little bit more. But I was shocked that they said that.
Yeah. I think the only thing, when we think about the Quantum City initiative, the Quantum City definition is very clear: 10% GDP growth over 10 years. So I think when we talk about things like, is Detroit back, hopefully moving forward, we can get off of that question of how do we measure these things. I really don't think it's rocket
Hmm.
science, it's GDP growth. So let's just look at the GDP growth. And then who's required. I think the only other missing voice from the Quantum City initiative of who we're trying to bring in, we had tech in the room. We had at the preliminary event at View Boston, we had some representatives that just showed up on their own. I would like to start to weave them into the conversation because we need people that are not only removing the barriers to build, but are actually enabling and incentivizing, which we've talked on this show a lot about, right? I think they need to, first, if we could just get them out of the way from preventing private markets doing their thing, that'd be great. But I think they can actually be a catalyst. So we heard transitioning to the second panel, the Great Real Estate Reset, we heard from multiple partners that are located in Dubai. They have partners in the people that work at the government level rather than kind of the
Mhm.
tension we see in a lot of cities in the US. And so I think that that's one of the themes that we need to continue to press on.
Yeah, and the idea, so we started with the retrofit. How do you take an existing city, right? And then we went to the Great Real Estate Reset, and we specifically brought in the international sort of speaker set here for that. And the idea of this panel, like you said, was how do you start fresh? Let's build this. Let's just take some new land and let's just start fresh. What would a city look like? Now, one thing before we talk about that is I thought I was a good moderator
Hmm.
because I like to talk.
Hmm.
Peter Grant, just an absolute stud. Peter's from the Wall Street Journal. He flew in from the event.
Dude, he
He's
also
actually
just had his laptop out. That was baller.
what stud.
Just had
Here
his
I am
laptop. He was
printing.
probably
Here I am.
ripping emails. No, he was
Here I am.
fully dialed in. He's a very good moderator. Very good.
The way he pulls the threads was great. But anyways, a couple of the examples here, and we focused obviously a lot on the Emirates and Dubai. But then we had Travis McCready, and Travis is very interesting because so he's from JLL,
Yeah.
and he's
He's
a
just the
wonderful
man.
gentleman.
I
He's a
mean, he's the man.
wonderful gentleman,
Yeah.
but he's working on California Forever, which is super interesting. Marwan and Tom Sweeney were able to speak to how cities abroad are able to move very quickly, right? They're excited about, right now, they're moving away from kind of Dubai and the Emirates. They're actually looking at Africa and a couple of other markets. The ability for the international markets to move much faster is incredible. And just the culture and everything is just very different. Now, where Travis was able to step in is how do you take in California, we've sort of beat on California a little bit on the show because of the issues that they're going through today. But he was very hopeful for the work that's going on with California Forever and how they're reimagining that city, which was good. And so there is hope. Yes, the international markets move faster, but there is some hope. And they are trying to really work with local government on this one, or at least that was his take. Now, who knows how long it will take, though.
Yeah. This was a top tier panel. I got to talk to Tom Sweeney's a fascinating guy. He's from Newcastle in the UK, but he's worked in for I believe Mujad Al Futtaim in Dubai for a while now. And first and foremost, his family is from Newcastle. He's from Manchester, and so I was like, "Are you City United fan?" He said he's been converted to Newcastle, so I thought that was an interesting tidbit. But his group was the group that developed in Dubai the first indoor skiing
Mm-hmm.
facility. And it was funny hearing how it's 20 years old and now that needs to be
Yeah.
repositioned because it's being worn down. And he said they have so much demand for the skiing facility. Their only issue is parking outside of obviously upgrading the infrastructure on it. He made some really interesting points about just the alignment with the other constituencies you need to build in Dubai. And listening to Marwan, I thought Marwan's group is again not just working in the Middle East. They're doing a lot in Africa and LATAM and certain areas of Asia. And he hit on they're doing work in the Ivory Coast in Africa, and the people in the Ivory Coast are saying like the the developments need to have Ivory Coast architecture. And one of the things he was saying was that doesn't really exist. So how do you weave in the Ivory Coast culture into what they're building there? So I think they're a good example of how do you take the pride of a nation and a people and reflect that in the architecture and solve that such that you have infrastructure that works for the needs of modern civilization while keeping culture intact. And I think that's they just were very thoughtful
Mm-hmm.
about that. And then when you think about Travis McCready at JLL and working on California Forever, I got to listen to the CEO of California Forever talk about he came from essentially the post Soviet era bloc in Eastern Europe, and he's such a believer in America and freedom and capitalism. And he moved to California, I believe, when he was a little kid, and he showed like those old posters or magazine ads of California, good looking people out on the beach surfing, whatever. And he
Hmm.
said the California dream had been lost a little bit, and you have the world's leading area in AI. And when you think of the full cycle of new technology development should be near the physical manufacturing of what's needed for the full stack of AI. Like, it's a very mission oriented development in California forever. And it's inspiring. And Travis is such a dynamic speaker, and he's just such a good guy. Like, you got pumped up listening to him talk about how connected to the mission he is. And there was some disagreement back and forth, very respectful, but I thought it was a great panel in terms of how do you, from a central planning place, make sure that developments have enough freedom to be creative while also making sure that they comply with some of the things that a certain area says, hey, this design policy or something is important to us. And it's one of the areas, obviously I was just in the audience, but I think it can all come back to outcomes, right? I think the whole problem that a lot of these conferences run into is, if you want a 15-minute walkable city, that's a fine outcome, but don't make the rules. You have to have sidewalks, you have to have this. Let developers be creative. Let them think about the outcome, which is the 15-minute walkable city, rather than, say, impose centrally planned design regulations and rules and things like that. So if we continue to press on, do we have the right outcome defined that we want for this city, this development, then I think you have a lot of very smart people that can solve for that in different ways, which is how you get the creative power of a community in city design.
Now, if you're a super fan of the show, you will know that I'm a big fan of malls,
Big
obviously,
mall guy.
and big mall guy. Tom, and the way that he was describing the mall scene in Dubai is what I needed to hear.
Sounds like
Come
you're
on,
a
this
Dubai guy, man. It's pretty high like you're Silver Spoon, and it's pretty luxury place,
malls
and
are booming there
they
all
love
hours
their
of the day,
malls.
all day,
Yeah.
all day, start to finish. What do you say, 8 a.m. to 2 a.m.? It's
Well, he was
outrageous.
like, again, he was like, if we had more parking, people would be at the mall more. And I was like, yeah, Gomer would be there.
Let's go,
Big
malls.
indoor mall guy.
Okay, so you started to transition a little bit into Joe Pines. We were lucky enough. Let's talk about lunch real quick. So we had lunch. We were at the Boston Marriott Cambridge, so we certainly had that catered. Little unique. Shout out to friends of the pod here. We had picnic, effectively activate everyone. Now, to be honest, I thought this was going to be a little bit of a hurdle. Okay, so
Yeah.
we partner with Picnic, and what Picnic allows you to do, it allows you to order food on a application from, I think it was like 30 restaurants we had yesterday,
Mm,
and then it will deliver. Nothing super new. The way they're thinking about it is new, and we'll get to your talk with Travis Kalanick in a minute. I thought we weren't going to get many people, so we bought a ton of extra food.
yeah.
I think our hit rate was over 85% of people that had ordered, and the buzz around Picnic as a unique conference activation was great. It was palpable. People loved it.
Yeah, you don't have to get the typical catering slop that you're used to at most event venues. You can pick from 30 different restaurants. You can get what you want, has your name on it. It's a great service. They're a great partner. So that worked out really well. I got some like hot honey chicken bowl thing or something. I don't know. It was
Classic.
wonderful. I'm the only guy who paid for my meal. That's my only gripe, because the link for me didn't give me the credit discount, but that's all right. I'm happy to contribute to our partner program.
Feature, not a bug. We had there were a
You
couple
set
of
that up for, yeah.
individuals. I think actually Justin, who produces the show, he was the same thing. We wanted him to pay as well.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense. That
for
makes
picnic.
sense.
Okay, so let's jump to, so speaking of outcomes, let's talk to Joe Pines. Listen, we were lucky enough to have Joe fly in, and you're a Joe Pine guy. I'm gonna let you tee
Anytime.
this one up. Joe's a great guy. It's the first time I actually really get to know him in person. I've only had a handful of Zoom calls.
Mm.
It was great to see him, obviously, on Wednesday night
He's
and
got good
Thursday,
length.
but
He's tall.
he's very tall, very
Yeah.
tall. We had a lot of tall. Jim Garmin was very tall. Travis
Travis
McCready's very
McCready's
tall.
tall. We had good.
Joe
You
Pines
can't teach.
tall.
Hey, can't teach length.
So that was great. But anyways, walk us through Joe's talk, and then how it moves into real estate. And I will say, outside of my panel being the highlight of the day, of course, mostly because of the moderation, Joe's, I think was maybe most talked about. Travis, we know Travis is a hit, and he's worth the price of admission, and we'll get to his in a second. But I think Joe really opened a lot of people up on how they think about their customers, their tenants, and actually that came up. One of the questions from the audience was actually was someone from Hines, which was awesome, was about why do we call our end users tenants?
Yeah. So we talk about Joe on this show all the time. Joe's a friend at this point. We've had him speak a number of times. And man, you've nailed something when you write the book in 1998 and you could basically give the same talk. Now, Joe evolves it every time he does it, but he could just get up and talk about the original book in 1998 and it still plays today. But basically, the experience economy, which he penned and coined, I believe he has a partner in his consulting firm that contributes, basically talks about how the every industry in the world is going through this experiential evolution, and the winners will be the people that essentially turn their products and services into experiences, and you experience the product and service rather than simply just getting pitched it and the typical kind of customer journey of I have a problem, sell it to me, but more in the environment, in an exciting environment. How do you experience a product or service in a way that makes it more meaningful? And he did a very good job of, I think, talking about how this applies to commercial real estate. And he talks about cruise lines, he talks about coffee and Starbucks, he talks about all these different industries that have gone through the experiential revolution, if you will. And he's now turning into taking it a step further in terms of transformation. And so, how do you truly make your product and or service not just experiential but transformational to the person who buys and uses it, such that it truly improves their life? He is a world leading expert with regards to, I think, the consumer and demand driven nature of what's happened in terms of the economy has become global, people have choice, and how do you need to compete in kind of a digitally enabled world. So I saw the most amount of people taking pictures
Mm-hmm.
of the slides and things that he ran through. And he's just a stud when it comes to, I think, changing the way people need to think about their business.
Yeah, he really is. And if you want, so it was one of the most requested sort of presentations. We only had a handful of presentations. There was a lot of dialogue yesterday, but a lot of folks reached out. They want a copy of the slides. So tell you what, fans of the pod, email me directly. Email me
Jeff
directly.
solved several riddles to get
Greg
the
at
first
HQO.
slide.
We're going to have to solve a bunch of puzzles. Greg at HQO. We'll send you the deck from yesterday. You can see some of the slides, but you got to email me. This is not a free one. You got to say hi. Friends of the pod. Okay.
Please,
Next up,
please email Greg.
please email me. Next up, there was a lot of buzz about this talk. One for picnic, two, a lot of folks have heard of Uber.
Mhm. I
Um,
think some people
some
have heard of Uber.
some folks have heard of CloudKitchens. We were lucky enough to have Travis Kalanick fly in for this event. He keynote, he headlined. You were able to sit down with him for, I think it was like a little over an hour. It was a really good chat. So walk us through that conversation. He's certainly forward thinking, and he certainly had the audience laughing and asking a lot of questions and whatnot. So walk us through your talk with him and sort of where you moved him to drive from his experiences.
Yeah, look, an hour is probably not enough with a guy like Travis Kalanick. Everyone is familiar with Uber and how they've revolutionized transportation in cities across the world. And I think one of the things that, if you've just studied and been familiar with the Uber story, one of the things that gets lost is he's a very, very kind of nuanced and, I would say, critical thinker in a way that people think of Uber. There's so much that went into operationalizing Uber and what they did there. And he's obviously a very big thinker and probably even better from an execution perspective. As he's certainly a visionary. The reason that his companies have been so successful is because that vision is backed up by what is a maniacal focus on execution. Even at one point when we spent a lot of time on city storage systems, which is the holding company. CloudKitchens is one company, and I'll walk people through the whole enterprise. But just the little details on how they need to pull air out and push air into different kitchens and
That
different
was
cities.
fascinating, by the
Yeah.
way, just and how he was approaching it to solve it, to heat it, to cool it. That was one I was like, this is way over my head.
Yeah, the guy knows a lot about air. And that's just one little thing in his business. And
Yeah.
it was cool because an MIT company was in the audience and they make the HVAC systems and the air filtration systems that power the kitchen. So they got a good shout out. He has the real estate business, which is he created a new asset class of these kitchens built specifically for in-home delivery, if you will. And
Mhm.
obviously it can be other locations in office delivery and things like that. That's one business. There's a ton of hard technology. We talked a lot about atoms versus bits, and manipulating atoms is not an easy thing. And really the way they think about what they're doing is creating an atoms based computer, right? So you think about computers have storage. What's storage in the physical world? It's real estate. There is the moving of obviously information, or you think about memory and things like that in computers. The movement of food both within the space of real estate, but also outside of it to the end user. So they've got a really interesting like the operating system for the physical world specific to food, but he didn't get too far into it, and I think we could have done another couple of hours. But they're really thinking about like how do you computerize the physical world, and that's something that we wrote about and talk about a lot in the kind of quantum city thesis. And so they're doing it in this food vertical in a pretty powerful way. Then they have Lab 37, which is their robotics company, which can make food. And this got back into the kind of culture and nostalgia of what do we need to preserve and where do we need to let progress move forward. And he said, look, some people just really like cooking, and that's good. It can and should be a hobby and an art in a lot of settings and scenarios. But the reality is that machines are going to make food moving forward. They can make them more healthy, they can make them more custom, they can make them more affordable and efficient. And I think there's a lot of good that comes from their mission in that. And so Lab 37 is the bowl builder that makes the food. They've got Picnic, which obviously we talked about, which is the interface and the last 100 yards of logistics of how does that meal make it from the door to the person, which is a lot harder than people think. There is all sorts of logistical coordination of how you batch meals for
Mm.
delivery, such that he even got into the nuances of like, how does a piece of fried chicken travel to the consumer without getting soggy? He is a world class execution mind. We went pretty deep into that. We went deep into his thoughts on commercial real estate. And I would describe it as he was kind about how far behind commercial real estate is. But he also,
But specifically here, because he had some interesting things to say about China and some of the work he's doing internationally.
yeah, they're across 30 countries, all the major and tier two cities in those countries. And he was like, it cost me a fraction to build a kitchen in London, and it costs a fraction of London's build costs to do it in Seoul, Korea. He's got a huge outfit in China. He's in the Middle East. His enterprise is vast and sprawling. So there's probably no one better to have kind of the purview of what does the United States need to do to make sure our best asset is our people, right? We still have kind of the human capital and talent, and that's not to say it doesn't exist in other areas of the world, but people still want to be here. But we will not be exceptional if we don't support our best asset, our people, with the best infrastructure in cities and things like that. Probably nobody better to hear from. There were definitely moments where I looked out into the crowd and there were just people kind of like mouth open because he's advanced in his thinking and intelligent. So that was cool to see.
Yeah, I think before we get to the cap markets panel, I think one of the most interesting things, which I wasn't thinking of, can't remember if this is a question from the audience or you or sort of, yeah, he brought it up himself, but he was talking about the comparing Uber to what is city storage systems and cloud kitchens and picnic, and a lot of the slack they got was Uber's going to kill taxis and whatnot, and so the comment around sort of picnic cloud kitchens and all the work that's doing Lab 37 was, are you going to kill restaurants? Like, that is the flack that he's getting in market. And his comment was interesting. And you briefly touched upon this. No, people love restaurants, but
Yeah.
restaurants are meant for going out, right? You want to go in person. You want to enjoy that experience. What he's focused on is the at-home meal. And how do you make that easier, cheaper, more efficient, more effective? I loved hearing that because my wife and I struggle almost nightly because we have so many activities with the kids to produce a healthy home cooked meal rather than just getting garbage takeout every single night. And
Yeah.
his comment was, this is what we're focused on. That is the real home meal at a sort of cheaper, more effective, healthier way. And I loved that.
Yeah, and I think he said 85% of meals are still eaten outside the restaurant, so at home, at work, whatever. So it's a huge part of life, and if you can save people the time from having to make the meals, you like cooking, so you're still gonna probably cook on Saturday night, Friday night, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever, whatever nights you're busy with kids, getting ready for work. This can help save people both time and money and make it more healthy, more affordable. It's a fascinating vision, and I think something the world desperately needs. Obviously, from its scale, it's proven by the success they've had.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly price of admission was covered there. Great chat. Obviously, an honor for you to get to sit with them. Certainly could have went longer. Okay, let's talk capital markets. Everybody loves to follow the money. What we tried to do here was try to mix things up a little bit by having two absolute whales from Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo. Some of you are more traditional with Jim Garman from Goldman and our friend of the pod, Brian Mayer from Wells, and really not pit them against, but bring an interesting viewpoint from Neil Mant, who focuses on digital rights for buildings, which is to me a little out there. I love his attitude. It's a little out there, which we'll talk about that in a minute. But then Robert Lair, who is focused on, and he could have been, honestly, he's a very impressive individual. He could have been on, I think, every one of the panels, what he's doing with Hula Lakeside. But his take was, how do we pool more capital as he's thinking about fundraising? There's just too much consolidated at the top. And then Natalia, who was all about blockchain and the tokenization of real estate transactions. We had Kale from Real Deal, again, just a stud moderator.
Yeah.
These guys are professionals. And we had Jennifer come in on the last one, which was really good. But again, to kick things off, and what folks were talking about here was, how do we ensure everything we've talked about pretty much the entire day, retrofitting cities, creating new cities. We talked a lot about the sort of AI bubble, a little bit weaved in. How do we pay for all of this? Is it the responsibility of Blackstone? Is it the responsibility of Brookfield? They're leading the charge now, or do we have to get more creative? Now, this is really where Robert kind of came in, and what he's doing with Hula Lakeside. He is creating effectively, and what he's trying to do is create a new REIT structure. It's not a REIT because of all the rules and regulations with REITs, but he's finding additional ways to focus a ton of capital, family office capital, private capital, public capital, grant capital, tax incentives, up and down the entire capital stack on how to create a new city. To me, that was one of the most fascinating approaches to this. And then you had, again, Jim Garman just talking about the massive swaths of capital that are going in, and Brian really focusing on the debt markets. But what was your takeaway on the juxtaposition between traditional capital and new capital as it relates to paying for all these new cities? And again, is it just going to be the rich keep getting richer, right? And then again, that was a common theme with the Brookfields of the world.
I think all of these things can work together, and I think we need all of them. So you get the global highest of the high perspectives from Jim Garman in terms of the money that Goldman obviously oversees for their clients across every asset class and the reach of a Goldman Sachs. And Jim, despite being what we would say is traditional commercial real estate finance. I mean, he's dangerous on crypto. Like, those
Mhm.
guys are as smart as they come. He's also just a really nice guy. And I think hearing from, we need more, to your point about Hula Lakeside, we need more Robert Lairs, where when you think about REIT structures, they were incredibly innovative when they came out several decades ago on bringing new sources of capital into the capital markets to finance commercial real estate. A REIT, I believe, has to have over 100 investors. So the idea was to make commercial real estate and real estate investing more accessible to more people. And we just haven't really evolved the concept, the rules for the REITs, because they get certain tax benefits and incentives, are a great thing. However, with that has come hurdles and regulation. So it's funny to hear that the REIT, which ultimately solved the issue of bringing more people into investing, is now part of the problem. And I think his thinking around how do you bring more private capital into the market is great. And Hula Lakeside, just from a product perspective, it's a fascinating development, and he's just a cool guy. So I loved learning more about that. Brian Mayer was one of the stars of the show. He got a shout out from Travis Kalanick. All of our new ideas that Travis and I were kicking around on stage, we basically were like, Brian's probably one of the only guys in commercial real estate that kind of thinks outside the
Mhm.
box. So he'll probably get some inbound ideas from people in the audience, which was great to see. And Brian, in his career, has worked in probably a broader range of things than most people I know in kind of the sector. He's done stuff in gaming, and he's done things. He's one of the few that's trying to bridge the gap between commercial real estate and tech. So Brian is one of HQO's closest advisors and friends. So it's always good to hear from him. And Natalia bringing the blockchain perspective, I think there is a lot from a smart contract
Yeah.
angle that can benefit commercial real estate. The blockchain itself, from a ledger perspective, I don't know if anything's broken there that will be fixed, but I do think some of this stuff inevitably can become more efficient with new technologies. It was a great panel.
I think what was most interesting about Natalia was so she's getting into commercial now. Her company has been around, I think she said 7 years, and based out of Miami, which is awesome. But her sort of main impetus and focus was real estate transactions have too many fees. This makes no sense.
Titles. She and Travis Kalanick, before their panels, were talking about how titles, the kind of whole title industry, is theft from the consumer.
After the fees, the transaction fees, the escrow, the entire process, buy and sell a home, and she's focusing on residential now, to buy and sell a home is incredibly efficient. It still has to be done in wet blue ink, so it's a wet SIG.
Yeah.
You have to go, you can certainly get power of attorneys, but you have to go to your attorney's office. It is an incredibly archaic, it's got to be recorded in the registry of deeds, which like is a binder, a physical binder. Yes, there's digital records of it. And I just went through this again. We just moved, and I was just in awe of how old school this process is. To me, that's what's most exciting about it. What she's working on, she's tried to just put it entirely on the blockchain. Actually, they got a lot of folks, and it's not just buying and selling in crypto. So this is where the whole regulation, where David Sachs and the administration is focusing on stable coins and USD transactions. It's not just crypto. And that's, I think, was another educational component, is you can't just think of blockchain. So many people think about it as just like crypto gambling and cowboying up. This is just an entirely new way of rethinking a transaction.
Yeah, and I think they're really on something with the titles. They're talking
Yeah.
about $20,000 taken from the consumer that just doesn't make sense. It was a very good kind of mix of perspectives on the finance panel.
Last but not least, before we go into a couple of quick hits. So Cities at the Speed of Change, again, absolute stud moderator, Jennifer Strong. The best thing about it, and I learned a lot from her just in the moderating side of the house. I wait till the end to do Q&A because I think I asked the best questions. She weaved it in throughout the panel,
Yeah,
which was great, especially because it was the last panel at a conference. Is always,
tough
I don't
spot.
know, a tough spot, right? Because you're risking people flying out early. I don't know. Shout out to us for keeping everybody in the room. Shout out to the strength of the panel. We had Brian Coop from BXP, our buddy James Scott, from MIT, who's just an absolute firecracker on stage. He's just an absolute stud, got great things to say. And then Gregory Duwerp from NOAA VC, which is an international venture capital firm. And then John Movinzada from the MIT Mobility Lab. Now, this panel was interesting because you had a lot of takes on this one. And I think one of the most interesting things, and again, we focused on, they covered retrofits, they covered capital markets, they covered the ability or inability to build. Brian Coop had some incredible examples of really solid partnerships with the city of Cambridge about building underground substations for power. So we talked about the power grid and how some of the developments that Boston Properties is doing just simply couldn't be done because of the draw on the power. So they actually had some really good public. But one of the areas, and you talked about this a little bit, as you're thinking about how do you evolve a city, was cars, parking. And parking, if you look at it alone, and highways. So if you look at the aerial views of cities, the modern, or I hate to say modern, but the modern city that we have now was just not built for the way that we utilize it today. It's full. In Boston, we did the big dig. So we did put the majority of our highways underground, but it's just built for autos. It's just built for cars. We can't keep up on traffic. We have too many the conversation was we have too many parking garages. We got too many parking spots. We got all of that. That's where we need to focus on the infrastructure, which I thought was interesting because I just kept thinking about utilities, the grid, that type of infrastructure. I didn't think about we need to actually route, and then EVTOLs, which we were talking about last, helicopters flying, like how people are just going to get around a city. So that was an unexpected turn where the panel went, which I thought was great.
Yeah, Jennifer I talked to her before the panel. Talk about another person I could have talked to for hours. She's like a true historian of all things innovation, fascinating depth of knowledge on. She can go back hundreds of years on city development, technology development. So it was great to have her moderating. She was incredibly strong. And I think the thing on parking, connecting it back to Travis Kalanick, was I do think there's going to be these innovative asset classes that pop up where you think about how parking needs to be run in an era of autonomous vehicles compared to human navigated vehicles. And I would say the only thing I disagreed with that a lot of folks kept talking about is when we have autonomous vehicles. I think Travis said when there's better management of supply and demand, the world will need something like 20% less vehicles. And I think there was a lot of conversation in this panel about how there's a significant portion of space in cities that won't be needed. And while I agree that the autonomous dynamic will completely change how we design parking garages, how we design cities, all these things. I think one of the things we always tend to forget is that when something is made more efficient, typically demand for that product or service goes up. And so while you might have a little bit of a blip in the curve, if taking rides becomes so much more efficient, if the time to get from point A to point B becomes more efficient, if you can do work or if you can do something valuable with your time while taking that ride, people will go more places. And so I think demand for cars will actually go up over time. I don't think it will go down. That car will be handling significantly more rides. So that's where the disconnect between supply and demand will be. But if so long as population growth doesn't continue to stall out and hit some of those challenges, I think you'll see more cars. And then what you will see is much more efficient space use and space design for how cars can be stored when they are not fulfilling demand for rides, where there will be very specialized operators that do that rather than me just leaving my car for probably gets used 5 to 7% of the time that I own said car. Again, we could have gone way longer on a lot of these panels. The other one that I thought we unfortunately didn't get into as much as I would have liked is drones. And I thought John from the MIT Mobility group made a really good point about the challenges with drones in cities is really going to be the noise and kind of the view of Imagine thousands of drones just like
Yeah, I'm
overhead.
out on this, dude. We talked about this. I'm out on eVTOLs. I'm out on drones. I don't want my skyline. Listen, I want to look up. Well, it's not sunny today. It's cloudy, but I want to see some blue skies, some
Yeah.
bluebirds. I don't want to see. Bzzz.
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of money to be made in silent drones. I think that's number
What
one.
about invisible drones?
Or just reflect, make it seem sunny. Don't just make it a, hey, don't block the sun. Make it seem sunny even if it isn't sunny.
So the simulation. So we could all just. So the what's it? The
Sunny
sphere.
silent drones.
The sphere. We'll just
Yeah.
put like big LED screens in the sky. Ooh. All right.
Kill three birds with one stone.
Just like we all know I like Vegas. Just where was that? The Venetian, walking around at 10 o'clock at night after Blueprint. It's sunny as can be. The canals are ripping. I'm like, what the hell time is it? Anyways, got to move on. Couple of quick hits before one more bit of news. Quick hit number one is JP Morgan. So biometrics is interesting in that it's been around. We've been talking about it. Will it ever be adopted widely? The biometric scanning of retinas, of fingerprints. We've talked about mobile access. We certainly provide a mobile access solution. JP Morgan's new tower, right? Massive. It's been in the news constantly. What was interesting about this week's story is that the biometric entry is mandated. Got to be a part of it. Cannot opt out. You got to be in. Can't use your old school badges anymore. Got to be in. A lot of people said this is a little scary. Oh, big brother. What's your take?
These things start slowly and then go quickly. So everyone's, oh, biometrics ever be widely adopted? You give your face to Apple every time you open your phone. So will it happen? Absolutely. I think there are a couple of things that need to happen, which is number one, they need to balance the ease and efficiency of biometrics with data privacy and protection. The technology to do that exists, right? Like you can have a facial recognition application where people can't necessarily see your face, but the machine knows to validate it. Like that's doable. You can partition data in the ways that you need to. And then it's something that the consumer will slowly become accustomed to. So I do think there's obvious areas that it can be abused, but I think we're going to see it. It is already widely adopted.
You can have my face. You can have my face. Oh, TSA pre-check and clear. I'm all about it. You can have everything. That's the least I got to worry about. You can have my face. I'm worried about from a security standpoint. If you want to get my information, I'm sure you can get it.
Yeah, and when people are like, "Oh, they're going to copy your face," well, they could copy your key. So,
dude, I would again. You guys can have my face. I'd love more of my faces out there. You know what I mean? I haven't yet really played with Sora. I've seen a lot of people on my Instagram feed making videos of them like rapping and putting on concerts. It looks real. That's what I'm talking about. I did make the joke to kick off the conference that this will be the last time that you and I are actually physically up on stage because next year it's just going to be AI and Sora and everything like that. So
that's going to be awesome.
That would be cool. That would be cool. Okay, stick them in New York City.
You can't be in multiple places at one time.
Now I can. You guys can have my face. Speaking of New York City, great news this week. Oh, guess. So this is an article from the Wall Street Journal. Guess who the author was? Guess who the author was?
Peter.
Our good buddy, Peter Grant. Okay, so in the first 9 months of 2025, Manhattan office leasing hit 23.2 million square feet. Greg, is that good or bad? That's the strongest start to a year in 19 years. Good sign.
Yeah. This is the story that encapsulates the whole narrative. Travis Kalanick talked about this, where he was like, if you like, yeah, I get people like flexibility, but if you care about your business, people work in person. I think the cities that really care about this are going to outperform over the next 5 to 10 years. And a bunch of cities are going to be scrambling when it's too late. So I think the dynamic of this is obviously being driven by world-class companies that obviously work in New York, but New York is a world-class city. I think it's indicative of performance. I think it's a leading indicator. So long as the New York City election gets sorted out and they don't go back to some regressive policies, I think New York's could be positioned to get even bigger and stronger.
Two interesting things about this article before we go to the next one. More than 140 leases this year were signed above $100 a foot.
Incredible.
So the haves, right, and the have-nots. However, Not to
Mhm.
be left behind, what was interesting, Peter, stud reporter, Class B buildings actually seen a little bit of recovery. So as we think about city retrofits, can every building be saved? That was one of the questions I asked the panel. No, was a common response. There's a market for Class B again. Why? Because the top of the market is continuing to be the top. This is what we saw. There are a ton of companies that obviously want that top amenities and the experiences there. If you can't afford over $100 a foot, Class B, so long as it's B plus, coming back.
I'd be leaning into B right now because everybody tends to jump. Like now that these numbers are in, you're already too late
You're behind.
on.
Behind.
Yeah, yeah. So you got to get
Um,
it on the B. Get it on the B.
Love it. Keep going. Boston, not to be, these numbers aren't as exciting. New York's bigger. Fine, whatever. The bleeding has stopped in Boston. Okay. Our market, our hometown market, had its best leasing quarter since 2019. All right. Another good sign. About 2 million square feet was signed in Q3. Love this. We talked about a couple of these deals. Hasbro and the Cressa folks did this one, Friends of the Pod, which was awesome. Subleasing availability dropped. Again, great trends. Not a ton to talk about here, just really good signs. Again, I think there's still going to be some trouble, perhaps 2025 and so on. The year's coming to an end, though. All things pointing to what is going to be a more positive 26 here.
Yeah, agreed. And I think Boston is, I think, should follow New York on this. And I talked about this. It wasn't popular at the time, but I said with everybody holding on to working from home, ultimately that's not going to work out. And what we've seen in a lot of areas is layoffs everywhere. Now, if everybody came back to the office, would it be different? I don't know. That would be speculating on rewriting history. But I do think that companies have a lot of leverage in driving productivity with AI. And what differentiates you from AI is you as a person, and you're most human when you're in person.
I like that. We're going to jump. I had one more story to talk about. We're going long. Warehouse market flexes. Prologis beat earnings up 9%. Good sign for the sort of warehouse industrial market. We beat on them a little bit, that saying it was cooling because everything was going to AI. However, Prologis, whatever. So there's us not talking about that. Quick hit. One more bit of news this week. I don't even really know where to go with this one. I'm absolutely terrified of this one. I don't know. I'm a little scared. We're just going to go out with it. I'm a little uncomfortable. OpenAI is going to allow adult content.
Yeah.
So OpenAI, Pornhub, OpenAI, like where does this go? Okay, so I get it. So Sam Altman, his argument, treat adults like adults. Fine, don't agree with that. His really what's behind it, he wants to boost some paid subscriptions. So if you want the OpenAI porn subscription, you got to pay a little extra. Fine, generate some money, whatever it may be. I don't like this. I think it's scary. I don't know. There's a lot of money, certainly, in the porn industry. We're seeing that with OnlyFans. Obviously, that growth story is incredible. It's terrifying, the statistics and the usage. I think we did talk about that at one point. I don't know where things are going to go. You got Sora creating these lifelike videos. You got OpenAI, people allowing erotic and adult themed content. You have OnlyFans, which is people now doing whatever they're doing on that site. Is it just going to be all AI? Like, where's this going? It's not, this is, to me, this is not good. This is not good.
Yeah. This is one of those clear areas where the free market can't really fix this problem. Pure free market capitalism runs into certain scenarios where what's best for society is not necessarily what's best for shareholders. And I don't, to your point, I don't think this is good for society. There's plenty of data on how young, particularly men, are getting into, let's say, X-rated content these days. It's scary how young they get access to this stuff. It's not good for birth rates. It's not good for the family unit. It's just bad up and down the stack. And art predicting life. There's movie, I forget the name of the movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Scarlett Johansson or whatever. It's not good, but will it be a moneymaker for OpenAI? Yeah, probably tremendously. So that's the rub, right? This is where, should regulators take this away? The whole adults being adults. I'm glad I'm not a regulator.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Cue all the jokes. Cue all the jokes. We joke a lot about this.
Yeah,
Joke.
those write themselves.
The memes are great. Here, that's it for today. That's a wrap. Couple of quick hits. Good news for you guys is we won't be plugging Strata until next year. So we'll
Oh,
get
it
that
starts
out of the
next
way.
year, October next year. We'll
It
get
starts
you
next
paid
year.
soon. Save the date.
We do have a ton of content coming out. We videoed the day. We'll be posting a ton of clips. So I know we recapped it here. Do subscribe. I mentioned that at the top of the show. We're going to be posting all the videos. Again, big thanks to everybody who participated in the event. And of course, subscribe. We have some really cool things. Learned a lot this past week. A lot of folks came up to us, gave us some really good feedback. We had some really fun things planned for next year on this show, upping our production quality, again, upping guests, weaving in more of these panel-like conversations on the show. So we appreciate that. Once again, episode 13, almost a syndication, which I did find. I should have said this. I read this the other day. Speaking of syndication, the Friends, I'm a Friends guy, they still make $20 million a year.
Yeah, there you go. That's our future.
That's our future. Thanks for coming out.